Aloha and welcome back to Leaving the Church to Find God, your safe space for exploring faith beyond traditional walls. I'm your host, Melissa, and whether you grew up in the evangelical church like I did, or any other system while seeking answers, you're in the right place. This podcast isn't about judgment or attacking institutions. It's about honest conversations, diverse spiritual paths, and celebrating the unique journeys that we all take in search of meaning. We've all experienced indoctrination in some form, and here we explore how it shapes our understanding of ourselves and the divine. Each week, we'll dive into thought-provoking topics, share inspiring stories from guests and listeners like you, and offer tools and insights for navigating your own deconstruction journey. Remember, leaving the church doesn't mean leaving your faith. It's about finding your own authentic connection to something greater. So buckle up, embrace the open dialogue, and join me as we explore what it means to move beyond confines and discover the deeper personal connection to the divine that exists within us all. Buckle up for Rich Rostin's incredible journey, starting in the vibrant world of Pentecostal evangelism. Witness a life-altering awakening that unlocks his clairvoyance and opens his eyes to the unseen realm of subtle energy. Join Rich as he delves deep into energy practices like chakra balancing and past life clearing, transforming into a skilled healer who guides others through the unseen forces shaping their lives. Across this two-part episode, explore fascinating insights from Rich's acclaimed books, Subtle Energy and the World We Experience, Afterlife in Hawaii, Stories and Experiences from a Spiritual Medium, and Awakening the Energetic You. Witness how Rich, the former evangelist, became a modern-day guide, learning how you too can unlock hidden potential and navigate the unseen currents of life. So welcome, Rich. Thank you so much for taking time to be here and being my first guest. Nice to have you.
It's always a first for everything.
That's right. So where do you want to get started? I know a little bit about you, but everybody here is starting fresh. So I know that you started in the Pentecostal church, correct? Which, as did I, which has sparked this work that I'm getting into and have been deepening in our group together. But tell me about it.
Well, I lived in Idaho, Boise, Idaho, which is a very conservative religious community. And I was in a full gospel evangelical church. And I was promoted by the elders to be an evangelist. And I started preaching at homeless shelters. I was responsible for working on the board, building a homeless shelter, working with men and women. So I had a lot of experience standing in front of people, talking to them about various things. I did that for about 10 years. And then I went over to India on missionary. I started a group called International Missionary Network, where I had some friends from India, and we connected with pastors in the United States who wanted to have some sort of a missionary experience. So we went over to India and we did exploits, I should say. And I'd been a Christian for like 25 years. I had experienced the gift of healing. And now you understand, I was in a full gospel church. We laid hands on people, cast demons out of people, spoke in tongues. We did all the radical stuff that, you would consider pretty crazy in evangelical circles. But I had psychic gifts, and I really didn't understand, but I could see things, and I could see I could feel demons in people and talk to angels and stuff like that, and it all became somewhat pretty real to me as being the authentic thing I was doing, because when we're in a culture, we always kind of adapt into the society that we're into. And we don't really have any basis for questioning a lot of beliefs, since most everybody around us believes that anyway, to a certain margin. Of course, working with the homeless mission, I was working with a lot of different people from different denominations. So I didn't care what denomination they were. We just all worked together to help people. But so when I was in India, let's go over to India, because that was like a turning point in my life where I stood in front of a bunch of Indian pastors and talked to them about Jesus and try to inspire them to be, godly people. And those people were completely poor. They had nothing. It was a whole different society. And I worked with what they called the no-name, the casteless group of people. In India, there are caste systems. And, it's really hard to get out of a caste system. So if you're a no caste, it means you live on the streets, you're homeless, you're a beggar, or you pick up plastic bags every day and sell them for a rupee so you can eat something. I mean, that's kind of the lifestyle. The contrast between the guy with the camel going down the street with straw next to a Mercedes Benz. That's the kind of contrast over there you'll find in third world countries. So I was working with the really poor people, but it was really amazing for me because I would go into a village and we would call sick people to us and we would lay hands on them and heal them. And they were actually healed. And I was kind of like flabbergasted because all the stuff I've been, practicing in the United States really never materialized until I was over there. So this was all new. It was kind of new to me, I mean, in the United States, a lot of Christianity is it's like a show. People say they proclaim this and proclaim that, but you don't really see a lot of the evidence. You go over to some place like that, and all of a sudden it really happens for you. Then it was quite an awakening for me because I actually saw people getting healed and their lives changing. But in India, they're Hindus. So they're not going to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior and convert to Christianity. They're going to put another little statue of Jesus next to their monkey god, Hanuman, or somebody else. So that was kind of a perplexing thing to me. Why would God heal some heathen that was smoking opium, that was dying, and I laid hands and they were healed, when they're not really going to follow Jesus? You know what I'm saying? This is contradictory to American evangelic. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what's the point, right? So then, but you have to understand that the time zone was completely different. So there was a lot of nights where I didn't really sleep much, and I laid awake, and I started having these, I guess you would call it, visitations from angels and the Spirit showing me that this God was really basically unconditional love. And it had nothing to do with religion. It was all about the Creator created everybody for a purpose, and that was to love them, to help them. So that just threw my whole theological understanding out the window, so to speak. So after a couple of trips like that and experiences, I started to question religion in America. My church I was in, because people were on power trips. They were always trying to dominate other people by being, just stuff like that. So it got me questioning, am I really doing the right thing? Am I really following God, or what is this? So it took a while, but through a bunch of process of pastors arguing with each other over who's going to gain what and who's going to control what and a bunch of stuff like that, I just left the church. I finally left the church, but I had a visitation. I had a dream. And sometimes it takes really traumatic things for people to change, because they're in this group consciousness and their belief system is based on fear of the unknown, fear of judgment. And when you've studied the Bible as long as I had, I knew the Bible pretty well. I was pretty well programmed to believe that, if I swayed away from Jesus, I was going to go to hell and that kind of stuff. So you can see how people get entrapped into a mindset of thinking, which prohibits them from moving on to other spiritual endeavors. So, but I had this dream and it was incredible. And this angel comes and says, "You got to leave." And I woke up one morning and told my wife, I said, "We're leaving the church." And she goes, "What?" "Yeah, we're leaving. We're not supposed to be here anymore. Something's wrong here. We've got to find what's going on." So anyway, my wife was glad to leave because she didn't really enjoy it there. So we went to another church, because you got to understand when you're coming out of something, you're programmed to believe that you still have to be part of it because of the fear-based. So I'd go to another church and got involved with all the men's ministries and everything, the mission and everything. But then again, I came back to square one, questioning what I was really believing. Now, this took a process of a couple of years. This wasn't just overnight. So then I went from that church to another church that was real small. And then at that particular time, my wife was involved in watching TV programs about the afterlife. And I really wasn't interested in it that much. But we had some experiences at our house. We had people knocking on the doors, nobody's there, faucets running, nobody's there, poltergeist stuff. And finally, my wife and we started questioning things, what's really going on. So I went to another church that had a pastor who was a psychic. And I never had experienced being around a person like that. And I had a session with him. I walked into a room and he goes, "Oh, your father's standing here, my wife's standing there. Your father's standing there and he wants to talk to you." And it was like, "What?" And this pastor looks at me and he goes, "You have the same gifts that I do." And I go, "Oh, I do? That's why I can see stuff?" He says, "Yeah, you can talk to angels just like I can, but you just never knew it because you were brainwashed into this religious stuff." And of course, he didn't want me to, he didn't call it brainwashing. He just says, "You're involved in this, religious, spiritual experience, whatever."
What type
So,
of church was that you found him at?
well, he had his own church. It was Napa. It was in Napa, Idaho. I don't know if he's still there or not, but he had about 150, 200 people in his church. And he was a really nice guy. He was kind of an extrovert. He had real long hair and he was kind of like outspoken type of a person that would be not considered, according to the Assembly of God Church, they would say he's pretty radical. With me, it didn't really make any difference. I was just looking for people that had answers. And I went to his Bible studies for a while. I got really bored with the whole thing because I thought, this isn't showing me what I want to know. So I even studied the Kabbalah and went through all that process, the Jewish thing. I come out with, in the end, they put me in front of some rabbi, and the rabbi he couldn't answer any of my questions. I said, "Okay, I'm sorry, this isn't really helping me on my spiritual journey because you're really basically back in the Old Testament, which I already understand. So thanks anyway." So then I met another guy who was a psychic. He became my mentor, and he really had the answers. He was his name was Frank Jordan. He was incredible psychic, and his wife was. And they would sit down with me, explain to me, "Okay, your mother's in the room. She died 5 years ago. You want to talk to her?" I said, "Yeah." Okay. And he taught me how to connect in. It's the same stuff that I teach today is what he taught me, basically. He showed me how to get into the other dimensions. And we were on a same radio program for 5 or 6 years every week, and we would work on people and do healings with them. And so I had a lot of experience working with a group of psychics around the world. But when I got out of the church, I started writing a book, and it was called Subtle Energy in the World We Experience, because I figured out how religion works through group consciousness. So once you understand how energy works, then you can have an understanding of how religion controls people's thinking. Not just religion, but anything, any kind of group consciousness. So, and that's when I wrote my book, it was like how to get your power back. See, people give their power away to an entity of religion or military education, or even your own family or your culture you live in, right?
Yeah,
So,
I thought that something I was just thinking about recently, like, because I've really been untangling my own indoctrination, being from a Pentecostal church and
okay.
very deeply raised in that. And I have found that, because I try to ask myself, at what point did I accept that as truth? And I found that it's like these little moments when you override your inner voice to accept what somebody else is saying. And I think that those moments just compound until you're not even connecting with your inner voice anymore, because you've just given over that power to someone else. So exactly what you're saying, like I'm really starting to see that being uncovered in my own psyche.
And your subconscious mind records all this stuff. And if you tell your subconscious mind enough times, it becomes the truth. So you can't differentiate between the truth and not the truth, you see. So you get people that are just so adamant about certain things. It's because, that's what brainwashing is. It's repetitive energy, and people just, their subconscious mind finally says, okay, this must be truth because I've heard it so many times. It could be anything. So that's really basically, but I learned how to dissolve that. I learned how to get rid of that pattern, you see. And I put that in the book because I was able to really basically erase in my mind all my belief systems. So when I sat down to read the Bible again, it didn't make any sense to me. Here I'd read the Bible 30 years, and I would read John 3:16. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. And I would sit there and go, wait a minute, God only has one son?
Right.
It was kind of like, this whole thing doesn't make sense to me. Whereas before, that's what I preached.
Yeah.
And I
I had that
expected,
experience recently. A family member was posting a scripture about God taking out his wrath on these people because they didn't obey him and killed his children and the famine and all this stuff. And I was like, this is garbage. Like, this book that was so holy and sacred to me for so long just completely lost its power. I was like, this is trash. This is not God. Like,
well,
at all.
it's always the contradiction that God is supposed to be love, but he's willing to wipe out a whole race of people if they disagree with him.
Right.
That we still see that today. And so getting back to the energy work part of this was when you realize that every single person on this planet has abilities, but they've just been hindered so much that they can't find themselves, right? And look at the children today. Children are being born and they have so much intuition until they get programmed into something where they're shut down, where they're not given the freedom, to explore their psychic abilities, their intuition. So a lot of people go around and they go, well, I have intuition, Well, yeah, I believe you have intuition, um, but how are you using it, right? Are you using it to take advantage of other people, or are you using it for your development of your higher consciousness? So that's kind of, in religion, it was all about conforming to a standard set by someone else. So you end up being a little puppet running around in a circle, wondering whether you're worthy enough to obtain a standing of credibility or acceptance, right? So
Well, and
you
we're
have a lot of people running around, huh?
that's the premise. The minute that we're born into sin, and that just being in a human body makes us sinful by its nature. So it's just from the very beginning of the thought process is that we're unworthy.
Exactly, which is a complete lie. And it's like the other aspect is the afterlife, okay? Because really talk about it talks about heaven. Well, what is that? Okay. You can be, I sat next to pastors that were dying, praying with them, and they didn't know what was going to happen next. And I kept thinking, you don't even know what's going to happen when you were a pastor, like I was an evangelist. So there's got to be more to this whole story about why we're here on earth. So when I was able to finally learn how to define energy, the key in psychic work is to learn how to control energy, okay, and how to define energy. Now, you take yoga for an example. You know, the yogis from the very beginning, they understood the chakra system and how we have all these different levels of energy fields, and each energy field vibrates at a different frequency level, and that's in tune with certain emotions. And I wrote my last book about you. I wrote it, and I have all that information in there because I was crossing over thousands of people that died of COVID. And they would come to me and they had no idea who they were. They were still in a state of shock because when you die, your consciousness remains the same. Now, can you imagine? Now, I really feel bad for all the people that died of COVID because they were isolated in a ward away from their families. They couldn't even talk to anybody, and they were dying, and they were helpless. Could you imagine how that must have been for people? I mean, I just felt so bad for them. And then when they came to me, they were in this state of trauma. Now, in learning how to do energy work, I've learned how to release trauma from people and souls. And I would bring them back to a neutral point where they could go and cross over to their soul group. So what's not explained to our society is how energy is divided into dimensions. There are certain dimensions or frequency layers. Now, the physicists understand this because just look at the atomic chart. Everything has a atomic weight to it. That's all based on physics. So we are in what we call the third dimension, where physical matter is brought into form. But there's like 10 other dimensions higher than us that are simply frequency layers of thought and energy. So where does this, if this is what's perplexing about religion, is they don't explain the fact that we're supposed to have a soul. Where does our soul go? What is our soul? You know, they can't even define that much, which leaves people in a total state of confusion. So the soul is the consciousness that we have that carries on after we physically die. Because our souls don't die, they're eternal. They live on and on and on, because it's an energy field of consciousness. So where does that energy field have to go? Where does it go, you see? Well, it goes to heaven. So people go, well, I want to go to heaven. Okay, where's heaven? Well, I don't have any idea. It's just, there's many mansions. Jesus says, okay, well, that means that there's soul groups. How many millions of people on this earth die and are born every day? Their souls have to go someplace, or unless they're just wandering around in a state of bliss forever. So in my working with energy fields, I learned how to see and get into these different dimensions. And the fifth dimension is where our souls go to be with our loved ones who died before, right? Okay, so we would call that heaven. I mean, if you want to use